If you think they're helping you, think again. What looks like kindness is often a calculated move. Not all help is innocent. Sometimes, it's a leash disguised as a lifeline. And no one understood this better than Machiavelli. Have you ever received help that came with invisible strings attached? Does someone in power keep doing things for you, but you can't shake the feeling there's a hidden cost? You're not alone. Niccolò Machiavelli, the infamous master of political strategy, exposed this centuries ago. In his playbook, help is not always virtue, it's a weapon, a subtle act of dominance, a calculated power trap. Niccolò Machiavelli, in The Prince, offers insight not only into political power but into the psychology of relationships between rulers and subjects, leaders and followers, helpers and those they assist. One of the most overlooked truths he hints at is this: help is never truly free. Beneath the surface of a seemingly generous act lies a deeper game, the creation of dependency. When someone helps you, especially repeatedly, they may seem selfless. But in many cases, the help comes with unspoken expectations, emotional leverage, and most importantly, control. Whether it's a political leader, a corporate boss, or even a close personal connection, the psychology is the same. The more help you receive, the more your autonomy erodes, and the more you begin to lean on the provider. And in that leaning, you hand over power. Imagine a ruler who constantly provides food to his people in times of crisis. On the surface, he appears kind and compassionate. But Machiavelli would ask, why is he helping? Is it to maintain popularity, to silence dissent, or to ensure that the people never learn to survive without him? Now, bring that idea into everyday life. A manager who constantly saves a struggling employee might seem nurturing. But in reality, that employee becomes increasingly dependent and less likely to challenge authority or leave the organization. The manager becomes the rescuer, and the employee the eternally indebted. This is not empowerment, it's strategic containment. The trap is set with subtlety. It often starts small. Let me help you with this project. Don't worry, I'll cover that expense for now. Take this opportunity. I thought of you first. Each offer seems kind, even flattering, but the pattern grows. And before long, you're relying on them, not just for help, but for guidance, approval, and even identity. It's a slow erosion of self-sufficiency. This is where Machiavelli's warning hits hardest. What begins as generosity often becomes governance. Worse still, this dependence is internally normalized. The person being helped begins to believe they need the helper. They may even begin to doubt their own capacity to act independently. And once that belief sets in, the helper no longer needs to exert control directly. The dependent individual will restrain themselves. This is why Machiavelli would advise rulers to help, but not to empower. True Machiavellian help is designed to sustain your superiority, not to uplift others to your level. It's about building gratitude that converts into loyalty or silence. And here's the trap for those unaware. When we receive help, we often feel grateful, and that's human. But gratitude unchecked can become guilt, and guilt breeds obedience. The helper becomes not a partner, but a figure of unchallenged authority. In a power dynamic, this is lethal. You stop resisting, questioning, or even imagining life without their guidance. And that is precisely the moment you're ruled, not by force but by favor. So, what's the solution? Awareness. Not all help is a trap, but in the game of power, many times it is. Ask yourself, do I feel free after being helped or bound? Is this help empowering me or making me dependent? Am I giving away my decision, making in exchange for support? Because the most dangerous chain is the one you don't see, the one forged in kindness. Machiavelli's lesson is clear: accept help, but never blindly. Recognize when help is used to build loyalty or dependence. And when you help others, do so with clarity, because whether you're on the giving or receiving end, help is never neutral. It always shapes the balance of power. To the casual observer, help appears to be rooted in kindness, a natural extension of empathy and morality. But to Niccolò Machiavelli, help is a tool. It is neither moral nor immoral. It is strategic. When a powerful person offers help, it is rarely an act of pure compassion. More often, it is a calculation meant to serve a larger agenda. Machiavelli was deeply skeptical of virtue for virtue's sake, especially in politics and leadership. He believed appearances were far more important than inner morality. A ruler must appear benevolent, not necessarily be so. Why? Because the image of generosity earns trust, while strategic help wins loyalty and weakens rivals. Help, in this sense, becomes a currency of control, not an offering of grace. Think of a politician who initiates food programs during an election season. To the public, it may look like generosity, but Machiavelli would see this as a calculated investment, a way to buy favor, neutralize opposition, and secure votes. Once the votes are won, the generosity often evaporates. The help was never about the people, it was about the outcome. This mindset extends far beyond politics. Consider the corporate world. A senior executive might mentor a younger employee, offering guidance and access to networks. It seems kind, but beneath the surface, it may be a way to create an ally, someone loyal, grateful, and useful. The moment that mentee stops serving the executive's interests, the help might suddenly stop. Again, not compassion calculation. In fact, Machiavelli would argue that true power lies in helping just enough. Enough to make someone feel seen, supported, even indebted, but never so much that they can walk away independent. The goal is not to uplift, but to anchor. Helping becomes a form of soft dominance, a velvet chain. We must also consider the emotional economy of help. When someone helps you, especially publicly, it triggers a psychological imbalance, the need to reciprocate. This sense of obligation is not just social, it's neurological. Humans are wired to return favors. Strategic leaders exploit this. They give to get. Not immediately, but eventually, and often at the most critical moment. Now imagine a ruler who helps during a crisis, not with the intent to restore stability, but to ensure the population associates relief with him personally. Later, when a policy must be passed or a rebellion suppressed, he reminds the people, "Remember who helped you when no one else did." The help was never free. It was an emotional transaction, and now the payment is due. Even religious leaders and institutions, historically, have used charity and assistance as tools of influence, converting communities not just spiritually but politically and socially. The promise of help becomes a net. Once you're inside, it's hard to leave without guilt or fear. This is why Machiavelli stressed the performance of compassion, not the possession of it. Appear helpful. Seem benevolent, but always keep your eye on the long game. Who benefits? What is gained? Where does the influence settle? And for those being helped, the lesson is stark. Do not assume kindness is pure. Question the timing, the motive, the context. Why now? Why me? What might they want in return? This isn't cynicism, it's clarity. Not all help is manipulative, but in power structures, help is rarely innocent. It is strategic positioning wrapped in a warm gesture. And once you internalize that truth, you begin to see the game not as a dance of generosity, but a battlefield of influence. In Machiavellian terms, the one who helps may smile kindly, but they are often thinking several moves ahead. If you accept the gift without reading the board, you may already be part of a plan that doesn't end with your empowerment, but with your quiet submission. At first glance, help seems like a gift. It solves problems, relieves burdens, and offers support in times of need. But beneath the surface, help is one of the oldest and most effective tools of domination. Machiavelli understood this truth centuries ago. The one who helps you owns a part of you. You begin to depend on them. And the moment you depend on someone, you lose a portion of your freedom. Niccolò Machiavelli was not concerned with moral ideals. His lens was focused squarely on power, how it is gained, maintained, and expanded. He believed that people are motivated by their own interests, and that the most effective rulers and strategists understood how to exploit those motivations. One such method: create dependence through selective assistance. Imagine a ruler who solves the people's problems, not by empowering them to solve those problems themselves, but by inserting himself as the indispensable provider. Food, security, employment, even justice, all flow from his hand. What happens over time? The people begin to believe they cannot survive without him. Gratitude turns into loyalty, and loyalty becomes submission. Machiavelli writes in The Prince that it is better for a ruler to be feared than loved, if he cannot be both. But he also implies that fear alone is crude. A more subtle, enduring form of control lies in creating structures of dependence. When people rely on you, not out of fear but necessity, they will serve your interests willingly, without ever realizing they're being ruled. This principle applies far beyond monarchy or political leadership. In workplaces, managers who solve every issue for their teams may seem helpful, but in many cases they are quietly establishing control. Employees never develop the skills to act independently. They defer to authority, afraid to make decisions without permission. Over time, the leader becomes the only brain in the room, and the team, its obedient limbs. In personal relationships, the same dynamic appears. One partner may be overly generous, financially, emotionally, logistically. The other becomes increasingly dependent, less confident in their own abilities, and more afraid to leave the relationship. The helper now holds quiet power, masked as kindness. It's not always conscious manipulation, but the effect is real. Machiavelli would advise the powerful to help only in ways that tie people closer to them, never in ways that make others independent. A truly Machiavellian strategy is to help just enough to breed loyalty, but not enough to encourage autonomy. Why empower someone to walk away when you can bind them to your service? Consider governments that offer social assistance but restrict educational or economic opportunities. The aid becomes a leash. The people remain trapped, not by visible chains, but by invisible systems of reliance. They are free in name, but not in spirit or circumstance. They vote as they're told. They obey without question. In modern geopolitics, foreign aid often follows this logic. Wealthy nations help poorer ones, but with strings attached. Loans require compliance with political agendas. Military support demands allegiance. Infrastructure development may come with resource extraction rights. The help looks generous, but it creates one-sided dependence, ensuring long-term control. This is the genius and the danger of help. It can wear a smiling face, but conceal a master plan. The one who helps you today may hold you captive tomorrow, not with weapons, but with your own needs. So, what is the lesson for the one receiving help? Awareness. Don't become numb to convenience. Don't trade your independence for short-term relief. Seek help that empowers, not imprisons. And always ask, am I being supported or subdued? Is this assistance or assimilation? Machiavelli teaches us that the real game of power is rarely played with brute force. It is played with favors, with aid, with quiet dependencies that grow stronger over time, until one day you realize that the hand that helped you is now the hand that owns you. In a world that praises kindness, generosity, and compassion, Machiavelli issues a brutal warning: helping too much can make you weak. While society often equates constant helping with moral strength, the political philosopher viewed such behavior as dangerous, not for the recipient, but for the giver. Machiavelli was not cynical for the sake of cynicism. He was realistic. He understood that power and perception are inseparable. A prince, or any person in a position of influence, must be careful not just about what they do, but how they are perceived, and nothing damages perception faster than being seen as overly generous, overly helpful, or overly available. Why? Because when you help too much, you shift the balance of power. You stop being seen as a leader or a figure of strength, and instead become someone who is easy to access, easy to ask, easy to use. You become someone who gives more than they should, someone who can be manipulated through guilt or obligation. Worse still, people begin to take you for granted. Human psychology is wired to value what is scarce and question what is abundant. When you are always helping, always giving, always saying yes, your value begins to decline in the eyes of others. Your time is no longer precious. Your effort is no longer admired. Your support is no longer respected. It is expected. Machiavelli warns us that such behavior creates a power imbalance that is reversed. The helper becomes the servant. The powerful becomes the tool. The generous soul, once respected, is now merely a utility for others' convenience. Even in ancient times, this dynamic was visible. Rulers who gave too many concessions were seen as weak and often lost control. Leaders who tried to please everyone often pleased no one and were overthrown. Machiavelli believed that a ruler must always balance compassion with calculated coldness. Sometimes you must say no, not because you lack empathy, but because you understand the cost of always saying yes. In modern leadership, this same principle holds true. Managers who always pick up the slack for their team may be seen as helpful at first. But over time, team members may stop putting in effort, relying on the manager to fix every problem. The leader becomes overburdened, burnt out, and, eventually, disrespected. In friendships or romantic relationships, helping too much can blur boundaries. One person becomes the fixer, the emotional caretaker, the constant giver. The other begins to expect rather than appreciate. Resentment builds, gratitude fades. The relationship becomes unbalanced, and often collapses under the weight of unreciprocated effort. Machiavelli's advice is clear: generosity must be strategic, not sentimental. Help when it serves a greater goal. Help when it strengthens your position or builds loyalty that benefits both sides. But do not help indiscriminately. Do not give out of fear of being disliked or in an effort to be seen as good. Such motivations are exploited easily, and respect lost through over-helping is almost impossible to regain. Think of influence as a currency. Every time you help, you spend some. Spend too much too often, and your bank of influence runs dry. People may still take your help, but they won't see you as a leader. They'll see you as someone to use. Someone who lacks the strength to say no. Someone who leads with emotion, not power. To protect your influence, you must learn the art of strategic refusal. Machiavelli would argue that sometimes, saying no earns you more respect than saying yes ever could. It signals control, it signals value, and most importantly, it signals that your power is not for sale, not for guilt, and not for anyone else's comfort. In a world where people are taught to help endlessly, this is a difficult truth. But if you wish to preserve your dignity, your boundaries, and your power, then helping too much is not compassion, it's compromise. In one of his most unsettling yet honest observations, Machiavelli declares, "Men are quicker to forget the death of their father than the loss of their inheritance." This insight underscores a profound psychological reality. Gratitude is fleeting, but power and loss are etched deeply into human memory. When you help others, whether out of compassion, duty, or generosity, you may expect appreciation, you may hope for loyalty. But Machiavelli warns that these expectations are often illusions. The truth: gratitude has a short shelf life. It fades quickly, especially when the helper becomes inconvenient, unavailable, or no longer useful. People may thank you once, maybe twice, but over time their memory of your sacrifice dims, especially if they begin to believe they were entitled to your help. The very act of generosity, if repeated too often, can turn into an expectation, not a blessing. They begin to view your help as something they deserved, not something they received out of kindness. And when that expectation is broken, when you say no or pull back, resentment replaces gratitude. This reversal is dangerous. The person you once helped may turn against you, now viewing your refusal not as a boundary, but as betrayal. Machiavelli would argue that the currency of power endures longer than the currency of kindness. A display of strength, of control, of independence, of discipline leaves a deeper impression than acts of generosity. Why? Because power is remembered with fear or respect. Gratitude is remembered with warmth. But warmth rarely survives in the cold calculations of ambition, competition, or self-interest. Consider the political realm. A ruler who gives land, pardons enemies, or distributes wealth may earn momentary applause. But if he later takes a firm stance or denies a favor, those same beneficiaries may turn hostile. Why? Because the gratitude they once felt is now gone, replaced by the memory of what they've lost, or didn't get. Meanwhile, the ruler who rules with steadiness, strength, and calculated generosity, offering help sparingly and with purpose, is more likely to retain authority and respect. In the workplace, a manager who always accommodates team members' personal requests may be initially admired. But over time, team members begin to see those accommodations as their right. The moment one request is denied, they may feel offended, even betrayed. In contrast, a manager who is fair but firm, who rewards based on merit and maintains clear boundaries, may not always be liked, but they will be respected and remembered for their consistency. In personal relationships, the same pattern applies. If you give too much of your time, energy, money, or emotional support, without asking for anything in return, you may initially be praised as loving or selfless. But eventually, those around you may come to expect that level of giving. When you need something in return, they may not be available. And if you stop giving, they may drift away, or worse, become critical. This is not a call to withhold kindness altogether. Rather, it is a warning to be strategic with your kindness. Don't expect loyalty in return for your help. Don't assume that people will protect your interests simply because you once protected theirs. If your position, influence, or power weakens, many will forget what you did for them. Machiavelli teaches us to build relationships not on emotional debts, but on mutual interests, strength, and respect. Help when it benefits both parties. Be generous, but not dependent on appreciation. Show compassion, but never at the expense of your dignity or control. Remember, power, when exercised wisely, is not just remembered, it is feared, respected, and even loved when paired with fairness. Gratitude, in contrast, is a flame that flickers and fades the moment the wind of convenience changes. So give wisely, rule your energy, lead with reason, and never trade lasting power for momentary thanks. We live in a world that praises kindness, generosity, and selflessness, and rightly so. But as Machiavelli brutally reminds us, blind help is not always wise help. When we give too freely, when we help without boundaries, when we expect loyalty in return, we walk into a trap of our own making. People forget kindness, they rewrite history. What began as your generosity often ends as their entitlement. You become replaceable, even resented. Machiavelli does not say never help. He says, help strategically, give with purpose, know the power dynamics, preserve your position. Don't confuse emotional connection with political reality. Whether you're leading a team, a family, or a nation, respect lasts longer than gratitude. Power endures when built on clear purpose, not emotional debts. In the game of life, and especially the game of power, don't be the helper who becomes the forgotten. Instead, be the one who helps wisely, rules with clarity, and always remembers compassion is noble, but only when guided by strength.